Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the SRC. Our agenda is slightly changed in that the Mayor can only come at 11 o'clock and stay for half an hour. Other than that, I think it's about the same as published. So, are there any apologies? We have some apologies recorded.
We have Councillor Austin White and Councillor John Healy is standing in. Councillor Mike Levery and Councillor Clement Jones is standing in. Councillor Marshall and Councillor Bagley is standing in. Councillor Bagley will have to leave after the morning session. We also have Melanie Cochrane and Simon Tompkins as apologies.
Thank you very much. Any urgent items or announcements? No items to be considered in the absence of public and press.
We will be considering items 16 and 17 exempt, and the webcast will be paused during that discussion.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest by any members? None. Thank you. Questions from members of the public? As usual. Minutes and actions of previous meeting. Can we agree the minutes are true record? Are there any matters arising from them? No. So we're on to item 8 already. Health and safety update.
Yeah, good morning. No accidents to report or near misses during this reporting period. Having a look through the accidents and incidents shows there's been a slight increase in that, with antisocial behaviour and rowdy behaviour being the main cause of these that's contributing to the statistics. Crime and disorder incidents, there's been a total of 174 crime and disorder incidents throughout the interchanges and the business reported during this period. The main area being Rotherham, with antisocial behaviour or rowdy and inconsiderate behaviour being the main cause. Been a total of 214 reports of damage to bus stops and shelters, with works orders raised and details that can be found in Appendix 4 with that. That's been a slight decrease from last time. Simca have had no RIDOR reports during this reporting period, although Siftel have, and Jerry will come on to them later on. The premises audits are up to date with no notable actions around. Risk assessments have been completed for this cycle. The next cycle is due to start early 25. Our health and safety system has now been procured, with the initial mobilisation meeting took place on the 18th of November, and we envisage the implementation phase will take between three and 6 months to embed that. To date, the new reporting system has no manual intervention required. Health and safety compliance work continues to review and update the processes, procedures and standards. Risk assessments, toolbox talks have started getting rolled out. Inspections and reporting. A new waste management standard has been written and is currently that's gone up, Michelle, hasn't it? The waste management one is in draft form, along with the drugs and alcohol standard has been written and is currently in draft form. We've revised the asbestos management plan, has been produced and has been presented to CDT. Martin's Law, the Terrorism Protection Premises Bill, also known as Martin's Law, will be included in the King's Speech on the 17th of July as part of the programme of legislation to government, and intends to pursue the parliamentary session. The bill was introduced to Parliament on the 12th of September and is currently undergoing parliamentary scrutiny. That's it from myself, as Jerry's side.
Thank you. Good morning. From the operator Siftel, they've reported 8 RIDORs in this period. July were 3, August 4 and September 1. The majority of those were signals passed at bar or minor RTCs. Happy to answer any questions if any of those individual incidents have leapt out at anybody. But otherwise, I would say that fits into business as usual currently with the reporting stats.
Thank you very much for that. Just a couple of questions for me. You give information on recorded accidents and incidents under paragraph 2.2, which show they were, higher in January, they went down April, June, as you comment, went up again July, September. Is it possible to give a sort of longer term analysis of those? Because sort of 3 periods doesn't really give us much of a, much of a trend. A sort of couple of years of line graph or something would be much easier to see whether they're going up generally, down generally, or just doing what you'd expect, which is wobbling up and down from quarter to quarter. Just one for future reference. And the other one is there's a comment, you can see that there's a particular problem with antisocial behaviour or whatever at Rotherham Interchange. Do we understand why? And is there anything we can do to try and reduce that? I was trying to think if it was differently located nearer the pubs and any other interchanges or something, but I can't particularly see that it is. They're all pretty much in the centre.
Only thing I'd suggest is to have some sort of security on at busy times. That's active security. That they can maybe go in and that they are visible.
Okay, I mean, obviously there's a cost to that.
There'd be a cost to that, obviously, yeah.
I think Gareth will be kicking me under the table at this point because he won't want us to be incurring a load of costs, but I just wondered whether it was a big enough problem for us to need to do something, at least understand what's causing it. I couldn't think of a reason, but, location or something.
We're not getting reports that it's violent antisocial behaviour. You get a few, but not a great deal. We had one early on in the year where there were an altercation between members of the public, but it's just generally antisocial behaviour in that form. It's not becoming violent, so it's not a concern that people are actually getting assaulted and things like that. But maybe an idea at some point during busy times and over the Christmas period to have security on.
It's just odd. I mean, Rotherham's not that different to Sheffield, Barnsley or Doncaster, but seems to have much more of a problem. So I don't know whether it needs a bit of a look.
If you do look back, if you do look back, Barnsley had the same issue, and that was a lot to do with the glassworks, which is obviously a wonderful location now. But the glassworks have security on now. Those security obviously push the unwanted individuals out, and they go to the interchange. Now obviously we're dealing with it at Barnsley, and that is reducing. And now that obviously Rotherham is also developing, we're now going into the same phase again. So we did learn lessons with Barnsley, and we need to match them with Rotherham. So we are going to look at that.
Okay, thank you for that. And I said longer term line graphs on these would give us that picture as whether it's just a blip in one area and then there's a blip in another area, which is kind of what you'd expect. So you can think about that for future ones. Thank you.
Can I just add to that? If there are incidents of violent behaviour, would that be recorded separately? Sorry.
Violence is
Violence is police get more involved and it gets reported into police with that for them to deal
So
with.
if it did go over into violence, we'd be aware of it. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just adding on to that one then. So I take it from what you've said then, it's not standard to provide security at all the interchanges. Is that right?
We do have people at all the interchanges, but not always the full security trained people. So we do have the customer service teams.
Right. So how does that compare against, say, Doncaster interchange, which I'm familiar with, and it does just seem to have a lot of potentially antisocial behaviour, but there's a fairly large group of people that patrol the area, and they tend to calm it down, or at least tell people to stop doing it.
The
If
majority
Rotherham's got nothing at all like that, then I can understand why we've got 174 incidents.
The majority at Doncaster are actually provided by Frenchgate themselves, and it's usually dealt with. It's within the centre. We don't have very much within the actual interchange in terms of incidents. In Barnsley, what we did was we did actually over the holidays provide additional security, which obviously reduced, and we got the knock-on effect that they now saw that security was there, and it's something that I think we do need to consider quite seriously for Rotherham, whether it's a shorter period as the same as Barnsley, so that everybody then knows that there is security there, and let's see if that works. But we're also taking the reanimation programme to Barnsley as well, which helps with the decor and the surroundings to try and make it so you don't want to be antisocial, as it were.
Thank you. I mean, just again from personal experience in Doncaster, there's always at least 4, I think of them security staff, there may be customer service, and I think it does have a bit of a deterrent effect, or at least a calming effect, to snuff it out before it gets too bad. Can I ask one other question on the Ridor incidents, please? There's a good page 39, I think it is. There's a good breakdown of what's happened in the road traffic accidents in terms of the injuries. What do you know what the injuries were on the slips, trips and falls? Because I think to get reported under Ridor, don't you have to have broken a bone or?
So the first incident, which occurred in July, it was reported under Ridor because of the amount of days lost. So that was an incident that occurred on the depot. As a member of staff who were out of work for over 7 days. Second incident was recorded under Ridor because the injured party was taken to hospital by an ambulance. So that's one of the recording criteria. Other than that, they would be minor incidents.
Right, and were those both on the depot?
No, the second one was a member of the public. It was a slip, trip, fall on the vehicle, and they sustained an injury that required them to be taken to hospital for assessment. Once they get to hospital, we tend not to find out what happens after that.
Right.
So just because they were taken from the vehicle to hospital via ambulance, it was Ridor reportable.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very good. Thank you.
Yeah, just an observation from Barnsley, really, that there is security staff in the interchange, but there's also security staff in the town as well, the glassworks, etc. And what I observe is that they work fairly closely together, so that if antisocial behaviour happens inside, it's quickly pushed outside and then dealt with outside. And that sort of whole community, whole town approach seems to work much better, according to the figures at least. Yes.
So a couple of questions really. First one is, isn't there any CCTV in these places? And second one is, you indicated that violent incidents will be reported to police. Don't these antisocial behaviours cross the threshold to be reported to police?
Yeah, they all get reported to police, but what I mean is the police will deal a bit more stringent with the violent ones, obviously, because there's been an assault or whatever in that respect.
Nothing further?
If I could just say, we are talking to colleagues in Rotherham about this. I think what we can't prove, but if we ever had the time to, I think what you'd see is when the weather deteriorates, incidents go up, and that's because kids from the schools, from the college up the road, congregate within the interchange because it's dry, it's covered, there's closed doors, there's heating, there's seating. So every time we get a period of bad weather, which it feels like it's rained non-stop for about 3 months, we see these spikes. Clearly went down in the early summer when the weather was nicer. So there's a bit that we struggle to manage peaks and troughs in that respect. But I do think this is like a system level solution in the way that you just described, Chair. This is part of the solution is what can we do in terms of uniform staff in the facilities, but it's also what can we do with colleagues at Rotherham Council, with their staff, and what can we do with the police. So we'll pick up a separate conversation with colleagues in the Police and Reform Directorate and colleagues at Rotherham about how we resolve this now, because Rotherham has been a bit of an outlier in some of these statistics for a while now.
Chair, could I just add to that? I think certainly what you just described there, Gareth, is what Doncaster interchange is like. And it's got the French Gate Centre adjacent to it, so there's a natural flow through there.
Yeah, I appreciate that Barnsley possibly more compact than others, but we had we have an added component in that we're building a large youth centre almost adjacent. It is adjacent. It's across the road from the interchange, so. that might be an extra line of defence, if you want to call it that. Yeah. Not that every town would be able to afford that, I suppose. So, if we move on to, well, the next item is the mayoral update, but the mayor isn't available until 11 o'clock. So, mid-year treasury management strategy.
Yes, sorry, Simon's not here, so you've got me today. I'm a adequate substitute at best. So I think just wanted to open just a reminder that the TM training has been arranged for 29th of January, and the invitations went out on the 11th of November, so hopefully members have received those. And it's planned to be a joint session with JIAC as well. Okay. So the purpose of the report is to bring to members' attention the TM performance for the first 6 months of 24/5, covering both the police fund and the MCA. And the report also asks for members to endorse the proposed increase in the maximum amount the MCA can invest in long-term investments. So as referenced in the report, the police fund indicators are subject to the outcome of the MRP and capital strategy review, which is ongoing at the moment. But both the MCA and the police fund are heavily under-borrowed. And in this context, it means that the underlying need to borrow exceeds the actual external borrowing that the organisations have at the moment. And this is a desirable position to be in, because with interest rates forecast to fall, you want to delay taking out borrowing for as long as possible. And this is possible because due to the level of cashback reserves held by the MCA and the police fund. So that's effectively what the internal borrowing is. The other important thing to note is the performance on investment income is exceeding the original budget. So we're forecast to receive at least 20 million this financial year on a budget of £10 million. And this is largely due to interest rates remaining higher than originally anticipated. As part of the MCA strategy, we are trying to secure longer term investments so that we can maintain treasury management income in the environment of falling interest rates. But we've reached the maximum approved limit on that at the moment. So an exercise has been carried out at Q2 to reassess the level of cashback reserves and balances over the next 3 years to determine whether we could increase the number of investments that we hold with a maturity of over 1 year. So as shown in tables 1 and 2 on page 47 of the pack, we now think that balances will be £40 million higher than originally estimated, and we're asking members to endorse the increase to the upper limit on those long-term investments. So in summary, the ASRC are asked to note the mid-year position and also approve the increase to the investment limits. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I keep being told off for not putting the mic on. I do apologise.
In case it wasn't picked up, the Chair said thanks very much for that report.
Yes.
I've got a few questions. First one's a fairly obvious one. Have we considered the impact of the police error in terms of controls that we might need to beef up here? You can always learn from other misfortunes. We've got 498 million worth of cash balances. I think it always feels like we've got an awful lot of cash here. Do we understand how we built up so much cash? The third one, there's a comment about managing the position to the mutual benefit of the MCA and PCC. Does that mean we can lend money between the two? And if so, what are the controls over that? And the fourth one, on page 58, I think it is, we've got a graph showing CFR and things. Now, it doesn't go out as far as the graph did at police, but it still shows the loan CFR as significantly above zero as at 2056, and doesn't look like to me like it will intersect with the zero position there, which is something we're enjoying to look out for. Are we confident that we're paying off all our MRP here?
So in terms of learning from the issues with the police budget, there will be an interplay between the information we've come across on the MRP issue and forecast for need to borrow, and we are working through that at the moment. So we'll be able to report in more detail on that to Audit Committee in February. I think at the moment that work is still ongoing to fully understand the impact of that on the MCA.
I was thinking more in terms of controls, and I appreciate there's financial impact, but there's a control. You know, you learn whether you need to beef up your controls because other people haven't done things quite right.
Yeah. So I think, we're going, well, in terms of going forward, the MCA are going to be managing the police fund MRP, and the controls around that will now fall under us, and we're in the process of rewriting the TMPs to factor in the police fund as well.
And maybe worth saying something about the work that we're doing with Force around capital strategy and the sort of enhancements to MRP reporting that we've been discussing in the last few weeks that we'll bring through to the board as well as to the committee. Sorry.
Yeah. And so what Gareth was referencing there is we've been supporting South Yorkshire Police with reviewing their capital strategy and understanding the financial implications of all their investments. So what they've been doing is trying to ration the amount of capital expenditure, and to sit alongside that we've provided estimates of MRP and debt costs associated with CapEx, so they can link the revenue implication with the capital expenditure, which hasn't necessarily been at the forefront of decision making in the past.
You know, but are we happy that we are calculating our MRP properly and we've got adequate controls reviewing it? I suppose is the short version here.
I'll pick that up. I think I understand the thrust of the question. So yes, is the simple answer. So we can come into this in a little bit more detail, and the item that we're taking off screen. The MRP profiles that we have equal the CFR. So that's the first and most fundamental check. We've had MRP policies tested independently, just to give me some assurance that the issues that we identified on the police aren't being reflected in ours. We've had that report back. We can share it with the committee at some point, but that gives us a clean bill of health as well. What we've talked about with Owen and his team in the last couple of weeks is how do we give this committee more assurance come February when we provide the TMS to you, because I'd expect an enhanced level of challenge over the TMS given the issues we've identified. And what we talked about is moving beyond the sort of standard boilerplate reporting packs that Link provide for most local authorities that you've probably all seen in your local authority TMSs, to provide you with what we think are the appropriate checks and balances to make sure that the CFR and the MRP are being calculated appropriately. So we've got those being worked up at the moment, but right now I'm comfortable with where we are in the MCA. It's because I was comfortable with the MCA that we were quickly able to identify the issues within the police. We've then had that tested independently. Audit have also reviewed it as part of the 23-24 accounts. So there's more we can do, I think, to give committee assurance, and that's the enhancements to the reporting that we'll provide to you when we bring the TMS through.
Okay. You want me to just go on to the other questions?
Yeah, there were three others.
Yep. So I'll just start with the graph. So the liability benchmark is divided between MCA and PCC, so they're two separate graphs now. So you can see, although it's a shallow curve, the MCA one on page 58 is gradually heading towards zero. Just we need to extend it a number of years to demonstrate it does equal the CFR in totality. So that's not an issue. The OPCC one, you can see that does flatline at about 65 million. So In terms of the kind of assurances on the balances, we do kind of cautiously project things like capital expenditure and the grants received in advance that we receive from government, and we take a prudent approach to ensuring that we're not overestimating the timing and the amount of balances that we will hold, and also to take into account we don't factor in the new CRSTS2 funding round as well. So everything we're projecting at the moment just accounts for current known confirmed funding from government and the restrictions on those grants as well.
Owen, just we're saying two principal reasons why we hold cash balances at the level that we do. The first are our revenue reserves. So we've got around £90 million worth of revenue reserves at the moment. That is cash that we've received largely in advance of need, but also cash that we hold to deal with specific risks. So if you were to look at our reserve profiles, and I think this is one of the things we'll include in the pack for you going forward, so it stands out really clearly, is that those reserves run down to a much more sort of moderate level over the term of our MTRS period. So they are there now, they won't be there at the same level into the future. The second issue is the timing of the capital programme vis-a-vis the timing of grant receipts from central government. Central government are very generous, tend to fund us up front for our capital expenditure activity. You'll probably all be familiar with capital programme activity taking quite a bit longer to deliver. So at any one point in time, we tend to have capital receipts in advance of need. So we're making that, we're making best use of that, making sure that we sweat that asset in advance. The capital programme will tail off over the coming years. We've got a number of grant streams that are due to drop out. Brownfield Housing Fund being one of the most prominent, but also UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which has a large capital element, so that will drop off. Owen's referred to our City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. That's our major transport capital fund that runs up to 2027. So we've got quite a bit of money in the bank associated with that. We will start to spend that in earnest in the next few years, potentially some slippage into 27, 28. Now the good news is that the CRSTS2 element of that funding, the second wave of that, that you might sometimes hear badged as Network North money. That is money that was earmarked for HS2 that was redeployed to us when HS2 was cancelled. That money is earmarked to us currently at 1.5 billion. So that will be another significant uptick in cash, but we are waiting on the announcement of that, and we hope to hear more in the spring spending review. So two principal reasons: we've got cash reserves, capital programme, both of which will fall in the coming years. But what we're trying to do through the TMS is make sure that whilsoever we've got that cash, we're making the best use of it possible, and that's one of the reasons why the report is asking for an adjustment to the limits for some of our longer term investments. It's better to lock some of the interest rates in while we can, rather than keep the cash short when we know that we'll have it for a few years.
Thank you. And we're happy that the controls between PCC and here are okay. Whenever you've got two bodies, or one body now, but two bodies with sort of things overlap, there's always a worry that things fall down the cracks. Or
Yeah, so Owen's referred to the fact that we're updating our Treasury Management Practices document now, which is almost like the Bible about how we manage TM affairs. Right now, investments are managed on behalf of the OPCC by Doncaster Council and are managed for the MCA by Sheffield City Council. We're intending on rationalising that down and managing the totality of it through the MCA in the new financial year. So we're just getting our documentation lined up ahead of that, and part of that documentation we'll be talking about how we can manage investments between the police fund of the MCA and the wider MCA. I think it's dead sensible to do that. The alternative is that we borrow money on behalf of the police fund whilst we've got cash within the wider MCA budget. So we could probably lend at more favourable rates by cutting the middleman out, and that would be in the interest of everyone.
At this juncture, with your indulgence, I apologise I haven't taken your question yet, but I will later. I see the mayor's on screen. We've only got him for 30 minutes, so with your permission, we'll go to the mayor, then we'll come back to this item, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Mayor Coppard.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, I can't see myself, so I'm flying blind. So
Perhaps it's more important that you see us.
well, there we go.
So, do you want to go first, Oliver?
Because I mean, I can absolutely. I'd like to leave as much time for questions as I can, really. So I'll be relatively brief because I think most of the stuff you're interested in has been covered by officers. I think that just probably worth reflecting on the announcement today from DWP about Get Britain Working and the announcement that we're receiving a significant investment from the government in terms of that agenda. South Yorkshire, certainly colleagues from Barnsley will know, has been at the forefront of that thinking through the work that was done due to the Pathways to Work Commission led by Alan Milburn. And so we've been working closely with the government to be able to put that plan into place. The money that we've been awarded today is going to be really significant in allowing us to do that. We've already had obviously Working Win and Working Well in South Yorkshire, so we're already at the vanguard of some of these schemes, but now we get to be able to do even more, and I'm really pleased about that. There are 70,000 workless households in South Yorkshire, so from my perspective, this is a really urgent challenge, and we need to address it quickly. And that's both because of the labour market and the sort of tightness in the labour market, and the plans that we have for the economy to create not just a bigger economy, but a better economy. But it's clearly also because people need to be able to work, and that is a moral imperative as much as it is an economic one. And we need to make sure that everybody in South Yorkshire has that opportunity, and at the moment they don't. So it's about helping people back into work, giving them things like work coaches, and making sure that everybody gets that tailored support that we know makes a significant difference. And the work that was done through the Pathways to Work Commission is going to be the basis for that work that we put in place in South Yorkshire. Also, we're saying since we last met, we've had an announcement around BSIP funding. So South Yorkshire colleagues will remember didn't always get treated fairly by the last government in terms of BSIP. So we have had relatively poor settlements in the past. We asked previously for £560 million, for instance, through the BSIP fund that we were told we would have access to. That was during Boris Johnson's time as Prime Minister. And we were told there was £9 million available for bus funding in South Yorkshire, in the country. And when we asked for that money, 560 million, we were told we weren't getting any of it, and that has then created a huge number of problems for our bus network in particular, and huge numbers of bus services have now been lost as a result of that decision. We're trying to build back, as people know, so currently we're going through the franchising assessment process. That is going really well. The consultation that we have out at the moment has already over 3,500 responses. That's in comparison to, for instance, West Yorkshire, where they got 1,200 over the course of their 12-week consultation. We're about 4 weeks in, I believe, and we've already had 3,600. I think that's the right number. So really good news on that front. But the BSIP funding is also good news. The BSIP funding, rather than the 11 million we were led to believe by the last government we would receive, we're actually going to get 17.6. I'm looking for Gareth to nod at me when I say that. £17.6 million. Thank you. Which I believe we're getting, which is really good news for South Yorkshire, and means we are going to be able to invest in bus services across South Yorkshire as a result. So that's good. Otherwise, we've been carrying on working on the police funding issue that we have uncovered, and we're continuing to talk to the government about that. Gareth has been involved in conversations, I know, and he might have just mentioned it, but clearly I've been talking to colleagues in political capacity, so talking to Number 10, talking to Home Office, talking to Treasury about what we're doing about those challenges, and trying to get to a good place for South Yorkshire. So they're probably the most pressing issues that I want to cover, and I'm happy to take questions on any of that, indeed anything you would like to talk about, obviously.
Are there any questions to the Mayor on any of those subjects? I thought you might, Paul. Yes, go on.
Good morning, Mayor. Any idea when you think you'll be able to say where the 17.6 million funding is going to be used to improve bus services, please?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really fair question, but probably not quite yet is the truth. I mean, ultimately we weren't expecting that level of support, so it opens up a number of possibilities that weren't there before. I'm conscious that the decisions that we take have to be done in light of the franchising challenge, and if we do go down that road, then sorry, bad pun, but if we do that and take that franchising decision, then obviously we need to think about that slightly differently. I think the settlement is good news, but it is something that we need to sort of think through and work out kind of how to use that money to best effect. I'm also conscious that we have a fares challenge in South Yorkshire. Fares have gone up in South Yorkshire, particularly for young people, for instance, over the last number of years. And that, for me, is something we really need to get to grips with. It's clear from the data that we have that when young people's fares have gone up significantly, we've seen a huge drop off in terms of patronage. And when you think about the future challenges of the bus services, we need to be in a place where we're actually getting more young people onto services in particular, because we need to make sure that in the future that is a first choice, not a last resort. And so kind of thinking through that challenge in terms of the long term and how we get young people to get into the habit of using buses is one of the things I'm particularly keen to think about. So there are a number of options in front of us, and we're working through that challenge as we speak. We will make some decisions clearly through the MCA board and kind of do that in collaboration with partners across our local authorities and across communities. And then when we do make those decisions, I've got no doubt you'll have some questions for me about the decisions that we did take. But for now, I'm probably not able to say more than we're looking at exactly what that means, because we've just received the news and it's good news. But like I say, an increase in funding does mean we have to think slightly differently.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that update, Mayor. A couple of questions. Where are we in terms of getting the airport reopened? And secondly, and I know quite how much of this is us and quite how much is other people, but where are we in terms of improving particularly train links across the Pennines to Greater Manchester?
Yeah. So in terms of the DSA question, you'll know that just at the last MCA board meeting, we approved £3 million of funding for Doncaster to continue the work that they've already begun on the negotiations with the commercial operator, making sure that we're getting that contract right, and working with the commercial operator to put DSA on a really secure and sustainable footing going forward. I think that's fundamentally important. You know, I realise that there are frustrations across South Yorkshire about the length of time these things take. I would just simply reflect that, you know, when I've bought a house, for instance, it's taken me sort of anywhere between 6 months and a year to buy a property. The 2 times that I've done it, we're trying to be in a position where we're reopening an airport. And when you think about the complexities just of buying a house, when the people you're buying from want to sell it, you want to buy it, and it still takes a huge amount of time. When you're trying to have a multi-level negotiation around an airport with some real challenges there, it is always going to take some time. I think to go from where we were to where we are in the pace that we have, I think is really impressive, albeit I recognise it's frustrating for some people, but we're keen to make that happen as soon as possible, but not rush it in order to meet some artificial deadline when actually the most important thing is that we get the deal right. So that's what we're trying to do. That's why we've allocated more funding to Doncaster so that they can do that work properly and effectively, and really get the legals right, because that will be the basis for the operations of the airport going forward. This has to be a 10-year plan. It has to be a long-term strategy. It has to be thinking in the long term about how we do this in terms of freight, in terms of passengers, in terms of private, and then absolutely fundamentally in terms of sustainable aviation and the whole kind of work around the airport. So we're doing that at pace, but it will take some more time. And then in terms of ticketing, and particularly Northern, you might have seen my appearance at the recent Rail North Committee. And you know, that was a real frustration, not just to me, but to other mayors, that Northern haven't quite got to grips with the challenges on their services. I think both myself, Andy Burnham, and clearly other mayors were quite frustrated with the lack of progress in terms of shared ticketing and ticket acceptance, and we made that frustration clear to Northern. It should be an absolute kind of priority that people are able just to hop on services when their services aren't working because of the poor performance of the operator, and they should put those acceptance schemes in place, in my view, as a priority. And at the moment that hasn't happened, so we made it clear that we want it to happen. That's happened quickly and urgently, in fact.
Yeah, Mayor. The Green Agenda. I'm aware that we're taking all sorts of initiatives on the Green Agenda. Where are we with electric buses? The airport will not make the air pollution issue any better. But also on the graph, on the report, we see that one of the major contributors to air pollution are HGVs. And I'm aware that we have 2 major motorways running through the county, the M18 and the M1. Take a lot of HGV traffic. Coincidentally, I live quite near to one. And there's very little we can do about that, is there? Or is there?
Well, certainly, I don't think we're in a position where we're going to be able to get rid of the motorways, but nor should we try. But I absolutely kind of recognise the challenge around air quality. It's why I was so vocal in my support of, for instance, the work going on in Sheffield around the clean air zone. I think that is paying dividends. I've said repeatedly, haven't I, that South Yorkshire should be the healthiest region in the country, and that has to be about more than just the NHS, for instance. It has to be about a whole system-wide approach, and clearly kind of air quality is part of that response. So on the airport, I actually probably disagree slightly on the statement that you made around the airport not making things better, because I think one of the things that the airport allows us to do is use DSA as an anchor for that sustainable aviation industry that we want to bring into South Yorkshire, indeed already have brought into South Yorkshire. So by reopening DSA, what we're able to do is build a sustainable aviation industry around the airport of Gateway East. Clearly, hybrid air vehicles have said they want to come into South Yorkshire. I know they've got some work still to do, but we were keen to kind of progress that deal and make sure they land in South Yorkshire quickly. They are keen to kind of develop these technologies which reduce the carbon footprint of aviation by about 90+%. We've got Boeing in the region. And they're here because of our expertise around sustainable aviation. Sheffield University, with an organisation, the brains behind the first net zero transatlantic flight. And so all of that can make actually air quality better and sustainable aviation a reality. And that's what we're keen to do. I recognise the kind of very real concerns for those people like myself. I firmly believe that climate breakdown is a real and persistent and indeed existential threat, but we need to get to grips with that through innovation, and one of the ways that we can do that is at Gateway East. More broadly, obviously, we've run the Citizens Assembly in South Yorkshire, the biggest regional Citizens Assembly of its kind in the country. Those recommendations will be going out and going public early next year. I'm really proud of that. That was a kind of a region-wide approach and a very novel approach to bringing our communities into that decision-making process. So we're keen to kind of make those recommendations publicly available from early next year. Haven't done now, work with partners. We're doing other things besides. We've already retrofitted, I think, 12% of households in South Yorkshire on electric buses. We're working through the Zebra Fund to make sure those buses hit the roads. Through the franchising assessment process, we've shown that we can bring in more electric buses into South Yorkshire. Indeed, I was talking to First on Friday about their electric bus retrofit scheme and how we might do more of that in South Yorkshire. So there's a whole load of things going on, and I'm really proud of a lot of them. We cannot go fast enough in this space. We are obviously held back by a number of things, not least funding, but we've got some massive opportunities. We've got the biggest share of the clean tech sector in the UK in South Yorkshire, and that's because of the work going on, for instance, at the AMRC. We've brought in commitments from Holtec around their plans for small modular nuclear reactors and a bunch of other things besides. So massive amount of work, really positive progress, but we cannot go fast enough in this space.
Thank you very much. I'm glad I gave you the opportunity to say all that.
Thank you.
Anything further? No. Let's see if you've worn us out then. Thank you.
That's my aim always. Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your time.
Yes. Bye-bye.
And we'll now proceed with your question, if you can remember it.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I suppose my question is, it's obviously the first meeting I've been at this, so I'm not all over the Treasury management situation. Really, my question is what is the change to more long term? Is that going to basically increase the risk profile? What do those investments do? What does the change in strategy do to the risk profile in terms of Treasury management?
In a way, any investment that's longer term does increase risk because it's an enhanced risk of default over a longer term. I think what I'd say is the majority of our long-term investments are with other public authorities, so we do try and mitigate that as much as possible. So we almost have a sliding scale in terms of the people that we'll invest to and over which length of time. So riskier investments over a much shorter length of time, investments over a longer term with much more secure counterparties. So the multi-year investments are largely with other local authorities. That gives us quite a lot of comfort. There's an implicit guarantee from UK government to local authorities. we've seen with the likes of Woking Council, Spelfar and others who've run into financial difficulties, that they've still been able to honour their loan book through government support. So the question is entirely valid. Longer term investments does change risk profile, but we will only invest with the most secure counterparties over the longer term, so we do mitigate quite a lot of that.
So, I mean, just to expand on that, say for my own kind of knowledge, is it that it is entirely public bodies that we're investing with, or is there some percentage of it that is those riskier investments that are in the market?
So we invest with a mixed counterparty portfolio. So lots of our shorter term investments are with AAA rated money market funds. That would be a similar position to local authorities, particularly in Sheffield, where I used to manage the treasury function. We do invest fixed term deposits with creditworthy banks and other counterparties. As I say, the longer term investments are traditionally largely with local authorities. Owen, have we got any examples of other long-term investments that aren't with public bodies?
No, none at all. They're all local authority. And on page 62, it shows the breakdown of the investments at the moment, and it does show we've got short-term deposits with banks, but other than that, it's all local authority lending.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from Councillor Clement-Jones' point, you mentioned before very quickly a big figure of £1.5 billion that might be our share of the cancelled HS2 money. Thoughts on where we could put that if we get it in large chunks? So will we need to then revise our treasury management strategy? Because at some point we're going to hit saturation point, aren't we, in terms of where we can lend it, I would have thought, to local authorities.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So in the spirit of prudency, that's why we're wired up as accountants. That £1.5 billion is not in our TMS numbers at the moment because we're waiting to see what the final settlement is like. But I think you're entirely right that in the event that we receive £1.5 billion over a 5-year settlement, we'll probably at any one point in time need to understand how best to manage a £300 million a year cash flow. So that's the sort of thing that we'll work through. There is a healthy market for borrowing from the local authority sector. There is quite a liquid market with money market funds, but that on top of other investments means that we'll need to work that through. And in particular, think about the timing of cash flows out for our CRSTS2 programme. So where we're heading with CRSTS2 is very different from where we are with CRSTS1. So in the first programme, I think we've got around 40 schemes probably. It's quite granular. CRSTS2 is focused around a number of core objectives. So that is bus franchising, it is the tram renewal, it is Rotherham Mainline, it's A1, A19 Link Road and Hickleton Mar Bypass. So we have a much more consolidated strategic programme that we're looking to invest into rather than lots of small things. So that should give us a much better fix over the timing of cash flows. And in particular, we might see lumpier cash flows out the door because we'll have much bigger contract payments to make. So that may, again, change the way that we approach this. But it is a significant body of money and really emphasises the importance of treasury management strategies to the overall financial health of the authority.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to item 11, Kate Miska. Yes, Kate.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Go.
Shall I kick off? Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody. I'll talk for a couple of minutes and then we'll, keen to leave time for questions and discussion. So my name's Kate Miska. I'm the Director of Insight here at South Yorkshire MCA, and I'm here to give an update on the development of our analytical capacity and capability. So this builds on the verbal update that our Director of Corporate Delivery provided in September, and thank you for the steers that you gave on that, which we've taken on board and thought about in our work programmes. So I've joined the MCA as Director of Insight on secondment from central government, and I'm here to address the development of our analysis and insight capability. We're building on a good starting point. We have around 20 analysts in the MCA exec who are supporting our priorities. And developing that analytical function, I think, is particularly as important as we move towards integrated settlement, to really ensure that our funding decisions are as informed as they possibly can be with evidence, and so that we can then feed the evidence on what works back into central government to create better outcomes across the UK. In the paper, I outlined that we've got a work programme with 3 strands. I won't go into detail, but I will just bring out a few highlights. So the first strand is setting ourselves up for business case success. So in September, the Director of Corporate Delivery outlined some of our work so far. We've begun delivering a learning and development series with central government, working with MHCLG and HM Treasury for SIMCA and for our 4 local authorities. And we're also boosting our economics and modelling and case-making capacity through further recruitment, including the focus on 2 specialist roles around transport economics. And we're also starting to refresh SIMCA's corporate plan, which should provide helpful framing for our business cases and our bids to government. The second strand then is working with our many partners on a shared approach to analysis and insight. So we're engaging with our local authorities and our partners in South Yorkshire Police and the Integrated Care Board on how we can work closely together in developing our research and analysis further. In particular, we have begun to work with our university partners to explore developing areas of research interest, or ARIs, for SIMCA. We've also been working closely with central government's analytical officers, particularly those based in South Yorkshire, to explore how we can further improve collaboration and policy making through evidence. And the third and final strand then is beginning to think about how our analytical function will need to look under integrated settlement. We've begun to start to have early conversations with other MCAs about how they have developed their analytical functions. It's very early days for this, but we're going to be thinking about this as part of our wider 18-month work programme for integrated settlement readiness. I'm going to leave it there because keen to take questions and get any reflections that we can take on board. Thank you.
Can I just ask the daft question? Talk about trade-offs within fungible budgets.
Yeah.
Can you explain fungible budgets?
Yeah, so I mean, I might pass to Gareth to explain fungible budgets, but essentially it's around the idea that under integrated settlement we will be able to take more decisions at the local level in terms of where our money goes within the framework that we agree with government. Gareth, do you want to say any more on that?
Fungible is my favourite word at the moment.
I'm more used to non-fungible assets.
Yeah. Well, I guess the answer's in your statement now. So the context for this is that right now we have around 40 plus funding streams that balance our overall MCA budget. Each of those funding streams comes with a grant determination. That grant determination tells you what you can and can't spend the money on and when you must spend it. And what options you have about potentially using it for different things. So what you end up with is almost mini budgets all over the place, and it is very difficult for us to develop a coherent whole around all that. So we end up with fragments of money trying to do things that add up to something more than their individual whole. And that creates problems with coherency, and it really limits our ability to deliver on our big objectives, because actually all we end up doing is just spending in little bits and pieces here and there, and often it makes us feel more like a delivery agent of government rather than a strategic authority that understands its problems and understands how best to deliver upon those problems. So we have for many years been talking to the central government saying thank you very much for all this money, but actually it's really inefficient in the way that you give it us because it creates perverse consequences. It means we deliver big transport capital programs, but we have no revenue money to shape demand. It means that we build out big economic infrastructure assets such as the advanced manufacturing park, but we've got no revenue money to put a bus on such that an apprentice can get there to actually work. So we missed coherency in the totality of our spend. So we've been pushing this argument with government for quite a long time, not just us, other authorities as well, and saying that we understand that this is difficult for government to manage because government allocates money into departments and then departments allocate money into individual functional areas. But if you want us to deliver for South Yorkshire, if you want us to change the economy of South Yorkshire, if you want us to support the national growth agenda, you need to find a better way to give us flexibility to work out what is best for South Yorkshire, and we'll use the money that you give us in that vein. So government's response to this is what they've called in over different times the single pot, the single settlement, and now it's been referred to as the integrated settlement. So if you follow the lexicon, actually I think it's deteriorating over time, but it's still edging us towards more fungible funding streams. And fungible simply means we take the barriers down between the funding streams. So rather than 40 separate pots of funding, we'll have much more flexibility to receive money in and say that we want to use our discretion about how best to deploy that. Now, we expect that there will still be some level of restriction, but it is a very significant step in the right direction.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. Two questions, if I may, Kate. On, I think it's page 67 of our pack, section 2.1 of your paper. It's good to see that we're doing this work with authorities to understand what makes a successful bid. Are there any emerging themes that's coming out of the work that you've done already? And then the second question was on the investment that we're putting into the analytical capacity. How much are we putting into that, and what's the sort of likely guarantee of the funding for that over what period of time, please? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Very happy to come back on both of those. So in terms of the emerging evidence around what makes a successful bid, yeah, I'm very happy to talk to that. We have looked at our successful and unsuccessful business cases, and I have also spent about 15 years looking at business cases in central government. So there's quite consistent themes, both within MCAs, local authorities, and central government around this. So I say one of the clear things that comes across is just a really good application of the government's the 5Ks business case model, particularly starting with the strategic case and having a really clear sense of what is the problem, being able to articulate that really well with evidence that is clearly explained, but also making sure that when we are making a bid or when we're making policy in general, that we're thinking about local objectives, but we're also thinking about national objectives. And that if we are pitching to government for funding, actually we're doing it in the language that is, is going to work, that is going to be something the central government will recognise. So it's about showing them like really, really simply and as effectively as possible why that investment is going to be effective, not just for us in South Yorkshire, but actually is going to play into, for instance, the growth mission that is now being talked about. So those are some of the really consistent themes around all the classics that you might expect around just the quality of each of the cases that we put together. So, for instance, we found in the management case, which is all around the successful delivery of projects and investments, it's really around how do we give evidence, for instance, that we've learned lessons from previous projects, that we have a really clear project setup, and when we've done that and when we've been able to evidence that, and those have tended to be successful bids and successful cases. Those are quite consistent themes, I think, across central local government in my personal experience. In terms of the question around investment, so I think, as ever, we have to take investment in analytical functions and our functions in general in the wider context of the budgets that we have. And I think that's why, it raises interesting questions for us as we move towards a land of potentially integrated settlements in a couple of years' time. We will need to think about what is the right amount to invest in the analytical function, for instance, to ensure that we have that quality evidence base across the piece for our priorities. Do you want to come on?
Yeah, Kate, worth just saying, Owen talked earlier about some of the additional treasury management money that we've generated. What we've done is, where possible, with the agreement of leaders, put money into one of our reserves, which is called our Capacity and Capability Reserve, and this is simply a reserve to fund bits of organisational apparatus, people, systems that we've not been able to afford in the past, and then support that over the medium term. So we have been able to secure release of some of that funding for Kate and Kate's team, and we've committed to funding that over 5 years, which hopefully provides us with a bridge into single settlement, integrated settlement, single part world, where we will be able to resource this on a more sustainable basis. But we recognise that this is an investment priority for us, for all the good reasons Kate has said. If we don't resolve this, we'll never win the game in how we attract money out of government.
Sorry, thank you very much. I know. What's the total value there? We're putting about something like 500,000, something like that.
So I'd need to come back to you on total values, but we've recruited, in addition to my post, I think we've got 4 or 5 new posts in total, but we already have the existing team as well, which is around 20 posts, and they cover everything ranging from support and transport, skills, performance reporting, doing economic briefing for the MCA board, for instance, and for our business advisory board. So the additional posts that we talk about, they're in addition to the existing team.
Okay, thank you very much. Look forward to that. Thank you.
Thanks very much for this paper, which I found very helpful and interesting. The only thing I'd sort of say, if you're going to do one again, perhaps an idea of timescales and a bit of an action plan on it would be handy, just so we can see when some of these things are going to happen. More a comment than a question.
Thank you, really useful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I see that point 3.2, that you're working very closely with the universities, etc. Is there any outcome from any of that at present?
So I think we're in the early days of some of those conversations. So what we are particularly looking at is the option of developing areas of research interest. So areas where we can signal to local authority, to our universities and researchers and these research groups that they're particularly of value and of interest. And I think that is a really important way for us to build our evidence base and to build our research base in South Yorkshire, because we have such a rich set of partnerships with our universities. In fact, we can do far more through working with them than we could possibly do alone, or even just with our local authority partners. We're at the early days of that piece of engagement. I think it would be important for us to spend some time thinking about what are those questions that we really need to know the answer to, where we don't know at the moment, and to do that in a collaborative way with the universities so that we can set up those ARIs, or areas of research interest, in a way that are going to be tractable and provide them with useful research questions to answer. But it would be useful to get any sense if you have of how you might like to be involved in that process as it evolves, if that's something you'd be interested in.
I'm sure it's something we'll be interested in, particularly as we see the research questions emerge. Thank you very much. Excellent report, and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you. Yep, we'll be very happy to come back again and provide a further update. Thank you for your time.
Item, I've lost track of what item it is now. 12. I have 3 agendas here, all different. Item 12, yeah, auditor statements of accounts. Is it to him? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to present the external auditor's report on the 22-23 accounts for both SIMCA and SIPT, copies of which are attached to the agenda. Both sets of accounts were reviewed by ASRC in June 23 prior to publication. And there have only been a small number of changes since then, which are detailed on page 75 of the pack. Before handing over to EY to talk you through the findings in the audit reports, just wanted to touch on a couple of the issues that will impact into future years as well. So firstly, because of the national reset of local government audit, it's been necessary to take the accounts to the MCA board earlier in November, and that's so that we can meet the audit backstop date of the 13th of December for finalising the accounts. The MCA board delegated authority to the Director of Resources and Investment and the Mayor to sign the accounts on behalf of the board following consideration by this committee. Secondly, the opinion being given by the auditor is going to be a disclaimer, so this means that the auditor has been unable to gather sufficient reliable audit evidence to express an opinion on the 22-23 accounts. And this has implications for us going forward in terms of future year's audit, and that's because KPMG won't have assurance over opening balances and will need to build that up over a number of years. So we should expect that 23-4 and 24-5 sets of accounts could well be qualified on because of that issue. So once you've considered the reports, ASRC are asked to endorse the final versions of the accounts and authorise the Mayor and Executive Director of Resources Investment to approve the accounts on behalf of the MCA. But I'll now hand over to Hassan to take you through EY's report.
Thank you. Welcome, Hassan.
Thank you, Chair. So you've got our reports for South Yorkshire Passenger Transport Executive and South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. As members will be aware from previous meetings, that the 22-23 opinion is being disclaimed as part of the government's reset proposals. The reports outlines the communications which we are required to do in accordance with auditing standards. It includes the opinion which we'll be issuing on the financial statements, and it also includes our VFM commentary. Our VFM interim report was presented at the last previous meeting of the committee, and the commentary is consistent with the report which the committee has already received. In summary, against the three areas which we're required to look at under the NAA's Code of Audit Practice, we didn't identify any significant weaknesses in VFM arrangements. I'm not going to do a page turner of the two reports, but happy to take any questions which members have.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for that, Hassan. Can I just check on page 7 of the first of the two plans you given to us, under section 3, results and findings, work completed to issue the disclaimer. It says a line, review of the financial statements. Does that mean you have done some sort of review on the financial statements and we can take some assurance from that, or can we take no assurance at all on your work on financial statements at all?
The review of the financial statements was merely a consistency review in terms of looking to assess whether the statements that we'd got, opening balances, for example, agreed to the prior year statements. So it wasn't a detailed audit as you would normally understand it.
So that's kind of a no then. I mean,
no, but we are. If you look at the opinion which we're issuing, it's a disclaimed opinion, so it doesn't provide any assurance from that respect.
Okay, and I'm guessing there's no way that even informally you'll be telling the next set of auditors what the position is, so that they won't be able to we're going to ask the question of them, but they're going to be in a difficult position in terms of doing next year's accounts because they won't have any assurance on the previous year's figures or opening balances for the following year.
That is correct. I think it's already been highlighted where a qualified or disclaimed opinion is issued, then there are impacts for the following 2 years in which the auditor then needs to consider what that means for their subsequent opinions.
In your view, are we likely to get disclaimed or qualifying opinions for the following year or the following 2 years then as well because of these issues?
I think that is usual practice in terms of when a opinion has been qualified. The subsequent 2-year opinions refer to the qualification that was issued.
I mean, I get that. So that'll mean we'll have less assurance for potentially 3 years then over the accounts position, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, and then I think it's for that is correct, and it's for KPMG will also be as your auditors for 23-24 onwards would also be kind of reporting to you what the implications are for the disclaimed opinion that was being issued for 22-23.
Okay, thank you. And changing tack entirely, I think the fees pages has got TBC on it. When are we going to know what the fees are going to be for? I appreciate you've done work on the VFM conclusion, but on the accounts, I think you're saying you haven't really done any work other than a brief consistency review. So I'm assuming the fees will reflect that level of not being able to do any work.
I think as I said at previous meetings, in terms of the fees are determined by the public sector audit appointments are limited. They are going to be communicating to the sector in terms of what disclaimed opinions mean for fees. They've yet to do so. Like yourselves, we're waiting for that communication from PSA.
Okay, thank you. It's just a bit frustrating. We've got the results of your work, but still no idea of the fee, and it would be useful to see the two alongside. We'll almost forgotten the one by the time we see the other, and you won't be around to presumably talk about it. But I'm guessing you're saying that's nothing to do with me. It's PSAA.
Yeah, that's right. In terms of the fees are going to be, and the implications on the disclaimed process, the fees are going to be kind of set and communicated by PSA.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, in final comment, we've got a clear VFM opinion, and thank you for doing that, and congrats to officers on that. So at least we've got something. So yeah, okay, nothing more for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose mine was going to be similar to Dave's in that how can we take any assurance from this? Is there other routes? I'm not entirely certain if it's a question for you. Are there other routes that this board can take other than just saying, the starting balance for this is the starting balance for that, and that those have been audited, even though without any assurance. What is the risk to the MCA of not having this for the next 3 years, or potentially for the next 3 years, or previous 2 years, and the next year in terms of not having that assurance, in terms of say those internal controls and knowing our position. So I'm not totally certain if it's a question for you or for some of the officers here.
In terms of what we're reporting, we're report the conclusions of what we're reporting are outlined in the report, and we're issuing a disclaimed opinion. An audit is one part of the assurance process which an organisation gets. Management will have in place their own internal control framework and the arrangements that they have for providing assurance on the information that they report. So if you want to get an assessment in terms of what management's processes are for in respect of internal controls, and they are outlined within your annual governance statement, and officers will be in a better position than myself to provide you with a summary of what their control processes are for their internal financial reporting arrangements.
Yeah, thank you. As I say, I don't think it really was a question for you. It was, say, more for the officers here to give us some assurance that that those controls are in place, and that you know, we can expect that you know, when this does all wash out, that we won't get any nasty surprises. I think.
You were just throwing it out there, were you?
Well, as I mean, really, it's for us to assess those risks, to find out what the implications are for the MCA, and as I say, it's up to management to give us that insurance that those controls are in place, and assure us that that this isn't hiding any actual issues with the accounts or the MCA's internal controls.
So it's not the easiest question to answer. It's a zinger of a question. I guess if I start with the risk, the risk is that there is an error in the 22-23 accounts. We use the accounts as the foundations for our longer term financial planning. So the risk is that because the accounts for 22-23 have not been audited in the usual manner, we roll forward a problem. Now, I would sit here and tell you that there are no problems in the 22-23 accounts, and I've got assurance. But we know from the work that we've recently done with the former OPCC that often there can be problems in the accounts. I guess the follow-on statement to that is that those accounts were audited. So an audit doesn't necessarily always identify everything. But equally, it does serve as a fundamental control and a fundamental line of defence against the risk of error or fraud in the accounts being rolled forward indefinitely. The reset provides the opportunity for us to move on from this, though, and KPMG will audit the accounts. Now, they may issue opinions that qualify those accounts into the future because they don't have the right level of assurance that they would normally build up and take comfort from prior year accounts. But it does offer us the opportunity to get back on track, and the 23-24 audit is now substantially complete, I think, Owen. So we have quickly moved into the next stage of audit, so that's ongoing. I think in terms of the wider control environment, Hassan is right to say that the external audit is one line of defence, but we do have others. So this committee supports the commissioning of the internal audit plan, and it may be that we consider the internal audit plan in the context of the 22-23 audit and the lack of comfort and assurance that you can gain from that. So we look at where we can infill around it. So that might mean a bit more focus on key financial controls than we otherwise would have, a bit of a focus on our financial reporting. So we don't normally bring financial reporting through to this committee. That reporting goes through to the board, but ultimately our performance against our budget and the outturn is a good bellwether about whether we're doing business as we should, or whether we've got adverse variances that we can't describe, we can't identify, we don't understand. That would be a good indicator of something going awry. We have got the value for money opinion that's provided in here that should give you some level of assurance that the way in which we conduct our business is appropriate. And we are subject to other reviews over time associated with our grant returns and regimes. So we submit grant returns into government on a periodical basis. They're marking our homework. As we're largely a grant-funded organisation, that serves as the control. And then a number of our grants require independent audit as well, that are often conducted through RSM. And again, that will give the committee some level of assurance that we're using the money as appropriately as possible. The final bit is this committee also receives quite a lot of information around things like health and safety, risk management and so on that also serve as good indications of the overall corporate well-being and health of the organisation. So we do have multiple lines of control. We have got the 23-24 audit back on track. That will come back to you, albeit probably, as we've heard, with some sort of caveated opinion. And we do put lots of financial reporting into the system, whether it be to our board or to government, and that serves as an indicator as well about financial health. But the overall picture will be incomplete for 22-23, and that is a fundamental risk, and that is a problem with this entire situation that we've found ourselves in. So I can sit here and tell you all day, nothing to worry about, and you can leave this committee and be happy, but ultimately, my opinion was to be tested by the external auditor, and that's where this falls down. But unfortunately, it is where it is, and we're now trying to do our best to fill in gaps. So I'm not sure if that answers the question in its entirety, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think what Gareth's saying is that we have multiple lines of assurance, and we have to take comfort from that.
Chair, could I just make an observation on what Gareth said? I endorse everything you've said about the role of this committee, and I think we've got to recognise that we've got more risk to deal with now, and probably that puts a bit more onus on us. And the one thing I've been always conscious of is wherever there's been an organisational control failure, one of the questions that's always asked is, should people have been more curious and asked more questions at the time when they're looking at the daily reports, the monthly reports that are coming in. So I think if you were to share financial, the normal quarterly, monthly financial reports with this committee, that might be helpful and give us a bit more comfort for the next couple of years, because as you pointed out, if we think about the police committee, an audit statement, and indeed if we look at some of the big high profile corporate failures, an audit report is not a guarantee that everything's fine within the organisation.
Yeah, I agree. I've often thought, well, what were the audit committee doing? So are there any further points? Yes.
I'll try some ill-formed thoughts at the moment. I mean, you're right. The first line of responsibility in any set of accounts is not the auditors; it's the officers, and that should be being done as least as well as it should be before. I was going to ask whether we'd put anything extra in, given the auditors weren't there, but we should be. Officers should be happy that the accounts are accurate anyway. So perhaps I'll drop that question. And the other thing is, when the auditors report this year, there are some errors that, if you like, reduce insurance to the public, but don't matter that much. We've got the fixed asset position slightly wrong, or the pensions position slightly wrong, but it'll correct next year. And there are those, as we've just seen, actually matter to ongoing budgets. So that's the sort of question I'll be asking of the external auditors for 23-24. Are we happy that anything that might have been wrong in 22-23, they've checked to make sure it hasn't really rolled forward into 23-24, and that's the thing that we need to do, I think. I kind of think we've just got less assurance, and there's almost not much we can do about it. There's a reason we have external audits, and we've not had them, and we're having to pick up the consequences, and we'll do for the next few years. But we are going to have more of an eye on it, because you do say, oh, well, these external auditors have looked at it, albeit they only pick up material errors and they're not perfect. So it's more of a ramble than a question, I think.
Just one point, I think the idea of looking at the internal audit plan for the next year to give us more assurance and focusing perhaps on things which we might think were more day-to-day rather less strategic, but we might have to do that to give us that just that little bit of comfort for the big balances that might be at risk.
Yeah, we're on with developing out the internal audit plan for 25-26. We've had a kick-off session with RSM colleagues, so we'll pick that one up and think about how best we can sort of infill around.
Okay, so if there are no further questions, we are asked to recommend that following the consideration of the external auditors' reports that we endorse the final version of Simca and SIPTA's 22-3 accounts and authorise the Mayor and Executive Director of Investment to approve the accounts on behalf of the MCA under their delegated authority once the audit has been concluded. Do we so endorse? Yes. Yeah. Ask for a positive vote. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. If I could just place on record my thanks to Owen and his team who've performed with real professionalism and diligence through what's been quite a difficult process. And I do take a lot of comfort from the hard work and the way that they approach this task. So, yeah, thank you, guys.
Turn on. And thank you from the committee. Owen.
Chair, can I just ask a quick question? Does that delegation also include providing the letter of representation, which we'll need to receive just in order to conclude the audit?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. And Hassan's gone.
No, it's still there.
Still there? Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Hassan. So, no further. Move on to item 13, internal audit plan.
Thank you, Chair. So our first report is our internal audit progress report. So this summarises the internal audit activity since the last audit committee. We've got one report which is finalised, which is the Sheffield governance report, which is next in the agenda. So I'll come on to that separately. In terms of the remainder of the plan, on Appendix A, which is page 405 of the pack, actually, I've got two different packs. It's 411, the one I'm looking at this morning. I know. But Appendix A shows all the internal audits we've got scheduled for the remainder of the year, and we've got all the dates agreed aside from Phase 2 of the OPCC integration, which will be in Q4. But the rest of the dates are agreed with management. We have had movement from the HR audit back into March, just to make sure that the harmonisation project can be kind of resourced as intended. And then we've got 3 audits currently kind of in train at the moment, so they'll be coming back to the February audit committee. We do have a number of audits kind of on the go and scheduled for the remainder of the year, but I am confident that those will be delivered by the end of the year. And that's all I was going to pull out really in the progress report in terms of our internal activities since the last audit committee. I'll just pause there and take any questions that committee may have. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Oh, you seem to have escaped.
Thank you. So our next report...
Only through your competence, of course.
So the next report is the Sheffield governance report. Again, it's on our... The title is the audit outcome overview page, which is page 421. That provides a summary of the internal audit work for this review. As you can see, it came out with substantial assurance. This one focused on the governance arrangements within Sheffield. So we looked at the committee structure, terms of references, meeting minutes, the escalation between meetings, making sure that they were operating as intended. And we also interviewed the board member as well to get their opinion on how well that's been embedded since the organisation was established. As you can see, there was no actions or findings raised. There was just one advisory point where what we found is in terms of kind of the board and the focus of them so far since March, it's been more focusing on our systems and controls in place and his deliveries as intended for the organisation. But, you know, a key part of a board is kind of looking at that future strategic focus. So we've just raised an advisory point in terms of maybe having a board strategic session going forward to look at kind of the future, and also when that 12-month establishment kind of is hit, looking at an annual effectiveness review of the board to make sure that's operating as effectively as it could be. But that was the one advisory point from the report. I'm happy to take any questions that the committee may have on this one.
for point of clarification, there's been a lot of turnover with Siftel. What is the composition of the board at the moment, please?
So the board's chaired by myself right now, with a space for an MCA director. We have a director from SCC on there, Sheffield City Council, and also a space for Rotherham MBC. And then we have the not the exec directors, which is led by the managing director and his team from the company.
So that's 5 people in total.
Yeah.
And 2 are currently vacant. Is that right from what you say? Or when you say
just one.
space, just one.
Yeah.
Which is that one? That's the Rotherham one, is it?
No, so that's filled. It's the second MCA director.
Okay. And the nominees from Rotherham and Sheffield, are they councillors? No.
Officers.
Officers.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Anything further?
Chair, if I may,
Sorry,
just to add, I think it's very valued review to have been undertaken. We're about 6 months into new governance arrangements. It's always good to have a bit of a health check partway through. I think that we'd support and endorse the findings from RSM, including the improvement points as well. I think that's a fair comment. I'd just add that this Friday the Siftel board takes place. The board will be considering the delivery plan, which will cover the 18 months next financial year, alongside the draft budget for that's the operating budget for Siftel for 25-26, and whilst that was subject to a lot of strategic work and some horizon scanning, looking at headwinds as the Siftel board refers to them, risks and opportunities. We do recognise that there's opportunities to look further afield, but what I would like to reassure the board is that in terms of long-term planning, such as linking in with the tram asset renewal programme, which does take obviously a long-term view, we think the connections work well in that respect, but we'll absolutely take on board the findings of this review.
So we accept that report, and the next 2 items are restricted, so we need to turn off the visuals and right. Item 17 and the resumed committee is Steve Ragg on JIAC update.
Thanks, Chair. This is an update from our last meeting, which was September. The next meeting is in 2 weeks, actually, where hopefully we'll hear more from Gareth about the issue that we've discussed earlier on. I'll go through some of the points. Internal audit, as it's confirmed that work was starting in the next quarter, although work had started late in the year because of the issue date of the original contract. We were assured at the time that this year's work would be completed on time and future years would be smoothed out over 12 months. As it's due to report on outstanding audit recommendations at the meeting in December. Subsequently to that, we've heard that ASETs are finding it really difficult to get contacts within the force and within the OPCC to do their work. I've not heard until next week the latest situation on that. External audit, Grant Thornton informed the committee that they've got a full programme of work from October 24. They've got IT audit specialists completing the work comprising an annual review of the Oracle EBS system and follow-up of recommendations raised in the prior audit period. There's a risk that their audit may not be concluded as at December's JIAC, and a single item agenda at JIAC is organised for February to review the end of year audit reports. just in case the audit is not concluded at the time of this JAG, and we'll see what develops with that, keeping the previous conversations in mind. In terms of strategic concerns in the force, JAG asked for the data migration risk to include a route to the risk being green. We're currently told that there's an issue, but we've not been given a date when it's going to be resolved. Members concluded that the report gave positive assurance that SYP's organisational infrastructure arrangements, i.e. its corporate risk management strategy and framework for assessing and managing strategic concerns, remain adequate and effective. IT assurance, JAG still await a date when the future state of IT and the shared services to be decided on, and then we expect to receive a plan for delivery of the solution. Budget monitoring, JAG received budget monitoring on a quarterly basis. We received a verbal update at this time, the latest report for the quarter of the year to the end of June 24. As at 30th of June, the projected year-end outturn position is a 0.39 million overspend on the Chief Constable's budget, net of external funding. The 24-25 capital programme is 18.5 million. The year-end slippage from 23-24 of 5.9 million has been submitted to the Mayor for approval, and with this approval the capital budget will rise to 24.4 million. The AGS for SYP, we had highlights of the status of the current governance issues, case file preparation, IT service delivery, body-worn video significant data loss, and information rights capability and ICO enforcement notice. The first three were still amber and the final one was green. And then finally, subject access request compliance, which is red. SYP Information Governance and DPO report, a plan on how SYP aimed to achieve its targets in relation to information governance to be set out for a future meeting. Members considered the update and acknowledged that the work that had taken place, but were only able to obtain partial assurance that we were going to be compliant. Simca Information Governance Annual Report, which was previously the OPCC one, members were able to assure the Mayor on the adequacy and effectiveness of the Policing and Reform Directorate's compliance with GDPR, SIO, FOIA, SARS and the publication scheme. And then finally, the Health and Safety Annual Report, members noted the report and were able to assure the Chief Constable on adequacy and effectiveness of South Yorkshire Police's health and safety arrangements. And that's a brief summary of what we discussed at the last chat.
You mentioned there, Steve, significant data loss. Body cams, was it?
Body-worn camera video, yeah.
What? Any looking into why?
There is an investigation on at the moment. It's due to report back to us shortly. But at this moment in time, we don't know why. We don't know why the backup wasn't available, why the services weren't backed up. And the only thing that we've been assured on is that none of the data concerned is required for evidence in court.
Yeah, I was just trying to think how that might impact on GDPR, but it doesn't because it isn't there, I assume.
Yeah, there are issues, as Dave will attest, around the management of data and information within the force, and ACC Rick Holton's the guy who's investigating this work, and we've not had an answer back yet as to what the issues were and why.
Bringing it back to us.
Yeah, as soon as we've got some assurance.
Thank you. Any further questions to Steve? No? Thank you very much for that.
Okay,
Steve.
thanks. Do you want that? You're welcome.
Well, item 18, I think this is Paul, isn't it? Is it? No, it isn't. Oh, it is Paul, yes. That's about risk.
was just looking at my agenda and 18's disappeared.
Yeah, yes, I have the same problem, you see, because it isn't on my computer, but it is on the sheet.
Yes. Yes, Transport Risk Working Group. We reviewed the overall risk register. There are a couple of risks there that have reduced in the scale, marginally down from 15 to 12, so not significant. The good news is that the members may recall that there's a problem with the balance weights, which are the weights which hold the overhead line in place. There's been a risk of failure to about 3 dozen of those. That work is now completed, and they will move to a normal maintenance regime, as has the work on the Commercial Street Bridge. The bearing work there has been completed, and that will move to normal maintenance too. The majority of our discussion focused on the tram asset renewal programme, which is, I believe, 100 million in total. There's an issue there in terms of getting the funding approved with central government, because the way the programme's being constructed here is slightly different to what they're used to. Normally, they would see this funding bid before some of the work was undertaken, but because we've legitimately started some of the work, it doesn't quite fit in their process. So there's a lot of hard work being done by officers to fit it in to the mechanism down there to get it approved. But that is becoming quite tight, because I think there's a February deadline that we need to hit. If not, the authority may have to look at how it decides to go ahead and fund that work, potentially at risk. But that is very much the worst case situation. So that's something we'll keep an eye on as it's going, as it's developing. And then in terms of tram asset renewal work, there's 3 key points to it. One's there's some further track work to do. Another part is the overhead line renewal that carries the electricity to the trams. And the third part is the life extension of the tram fleet itself, which is moving to quite key point of the procurement process to get that work out to tender, to refurbish the trams so that they can continue on till the early 2030s, when we might be procuring a new fleet. And what I would suggest to the group, to the committee, is that on our work plan, which I know is further down on the agenda, for maybe February or March, we consider having a more detailed presentation from the sponsor and officers involved in that project, so that the committee is aware of the significant spend and the issues around delivering that particular capital programme. So that's it from Transport and Risk Working Group.
Paul, how extensive will the refurbishment of the trams need to be? I remember, I think, from some time back, that the automatic brake was potentially an issue. Is that still there?
The majority of the work that's going to be done will focus around the underframes, in terms of dealing with 30 years of corrosion and running around on the streets of Sheffield. There are some components that are being replaced. I'm not sure if the automatic brake was one of those that was going to be replaced as a matter of routine, but I can certainly check with that, and I'll get back to the committee on that. And that's where I think a presentation perhaps on what's going on might be helpful at the next meeting.
I agree with that, Chair.
reason I might not be here, but that's the second point. I think it's essential that.
That's it, you're on.
Sorry. Well, I do it in the council chamber as well. It's amazing. Yeah, I would recommend that there is a further report back to the committee. I think it's essential. It's not just about dotting the T's and the I's. It is, as is said, a better understanding of it. And it's at that point then that we can start raising the pertinent questions, I think, rather than here. But it's important because if I cast my mind back to the last meeting, Gareth, I'm sure it was Gareth who was mentioning about the funding for the trams, and we were looking potentially at 500 million for overall, perhaps including buses as well. I can't remember the specifics. And it wasn't just the trams, it was also the tram lines as well, if I remember rightly, that need to be replaced or refurbished some way or other. But I know with the newer trams, which are different, they're much lighter, I understand, so less wear and tear on the infrastructure. But I do think that that's necessary, because although we're coming to the end of life, people have got to understand we're moving, transitioning, if you like, from one to the other, and the costs that implicates.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that's more of an issue for authorities, authority representatives who don't have trams within their authority.
We'd love them, Chair, definitely.
As we would. But, yeah, I think the costs spread across the 4 authorities, when some authorities don't have the facility, is likely to be a problem.
If I may, Chair, this is a bit cheeky, but just for history's sake, from where I'm coming from, I was on the old South Yorkshire County Council. That's a long time ago. Yeah, but there was then, at that time, in the development of the tram service, land that had been purchased for the routes, very much like they've done for the HS2. And I've often wondered what happened to that land. I'm assuming by now it's all been sold off, which is a shame. But whether or not it's worth looking into or not, I don't know. But there'll be the old plans somewhere, I'm sure, of the development of the tram service within South Yorkshire. I know Oliver has mentioned going towards Chesterfield, and I think that's rightly so as well. I'm not ignoring Chesterfield, it might sound that way, but I'm not. But I have a preference for Doncaster.
And I have a preference for Barnsley. Having said that, I value the tram as it is, because it's very useful for the region and for individuals. But it is an issue which might come up.
Yeah, just to add to that, in terms of the discussions we've had, there are, and this is why I think the presentation will be helpful, is there's the 100 million for doing the 3 pieces of work which I've spoken about, and then there's a further ask in terms of tram replacement of the fleet itself, and then extending the routes, which is part of the bigger ask in terms of what we might do in South Yorkshire subject to funding. But it's an interesting point I think you raised, John, about Councillor Ely, about the whether or not we've still got any reserved land that was purchased in the past.
Interesting question to ask.
I was just going to make a quick comment around some sequencing of various forthcoming meetings. So the DFT has an investment committee which determines the release of further funding. They approved the outline business case at their meeting in May. So in January, next calendar year, there'll be a decision on releasing the next package of funding, which will cover the 2025 re-railing programme, the refurbishment of rolling stock, and signalling and controls and other equipment. So these have been prioritised as keen to start and commission next year. There'll also be a further meeting of IPDC in April, and that will allow us to access the remainder of the £100 million. So those two meetings will be crucial. Paul also referred to tram extensions work. That sits outside the scope of the asset renewal programme, and the plan is to make a submission to HMT as part of the spending review process. And so obviously we'll wait to see what government's timetable is for that, but we're planning on the worst case scenario that will need to be in very early in the new calendar year.
So just going back a step, it would be useful if there is land to know the value of it. As we're an audit committee rather than a planning committee.
We do have land maps. I can't remember any that I've seen previously in Doncaster, but if it was of interest to the committee, we can bring the next iteration of our asset management strategy that includes maps, GIS style maps of where we do have assets and the like. Might give you a good sense of what we've got.
Yeah. So if there's no further points, we'll accept that report and we'll go on to item 19. Claire, annual.
Thank you, Chair. In the interest of time, I'll just take it as read. It's a very short paper. It just outlines the approach to the annual government review for 24-25, and just welcome any comments or feedback.
Do we ever get any non-compliances reported as part of the process?
In terms of non-compliance with lots of things we have to comply with, Paul.
Yes, absolutely right, absolutely right. And sometimes it's more interesting knowing the bits that we know that we're not complying with, which I've seen done elsewhere, that directors do sign things on, say this is how it's supposed to work, but actually it's not working because of this, and this is what we're going to do about it, was my question.
Okay.
I mean, this may be an authority where that's how it's supposed to work, and it does work. And thinking again about the discussion about where's the risk that we had over the accounts, that might be helpful to know.
So what we tend to do is a bit of a self-assessment against our Code of Corporate Governance, which is aligned to SIT for principles, and so is the one in the Policing and Reform framework. Something that will supplement this year's approach that I've not mentioned in there is, you might remember we've got an action from internal audit, from the risk management audit around assurance mapping.
Yeah.
And I think that will highlight some of the points that you're asking around there. So we're on with that, developing the approach to that, and I've actually got a meeting tomorrow with Working Group 3 from the Devolution Readiness Group to just sound out how we're proposing to do that and which governance domains that we're going to cover. And then that might lead into adopting a more kind of officer accountability statement approach.
Yeah.
So we're trying to mature our approach as we go along, but I think that'll drive at what you're getting at.
Thank you.
Go on.
Yes, Stephen.
Real quickly, you point out that this doesn't include the Chief Constable's responsibility, which is fine. So it's scope limited to the MCA. Does that mean it's the MCA including all the former OPCC activities now?
That's the intention, because they've got their own separate Code of Corporate Governance in the Joint Corporate Governance Framework, which is in our Constitution. Both codes of corporate governance are aligned to SIT for principles. So broadly, it'll be the same, but some of the detail might be different. But I'm working through with Sally, who's the head of governance in the Policing Reform Directorate, on how we work through that.
So are we taking reports on OPCC governance, or are they taking them through their processes and their audit committee, or both?
Oh, I turned it off, sorry. I thought I turned it back on again. I've lost my train of thought now. It will cover them as a directorate, so they'll be considered as a directorate, like all the other directorates, and will report into this committee. But I guess if there are any exceptions, we'll work out how we then report that into JAC.
I think this falls into that body of activity that touches on both, because of the way that we structured it. So I think it's entirely appropriate that Police and Reform Directorate comes through this committee, because so much of what it does is just, wide through the MCA now. But we will need to be able to explain and tell the story about how it stitches together with Chief Constable activity through JIAC. Now that might mean a bit of double bubble reporting, but I think that's probably better in the near term rather than having things slip between gaps. But one for us to keep under review in the ASRC JIAC working relationship conversation that we talked about a couple of weeks back.
We should have these microphones on all the time. That I would just shout at each other, as so often as older people do. Yeah, the camera should be able to pick this up, shouldn't it? Yeah. Asking too much of technology. Okay, well, it's item 20 and it's net zero update. Greg McClement. Is that correct pronunciation?
McClymont,
okay.
We'll take whatever we get. Thank you. Hi everyone, so thanks for having me. Hope you saw the paper and that was okay. The key thing to pick up from it really is, so the region is committed to, as sort of the national direction of travel is to reaching net zero with ambitious targets for achieving that. There's lots of stuff already going on and actually already delivered in the region across domestic housing, transport, industrial emissions, and that is making a difference. And the region's emissions are kind of reducing in line with the direction of travel of the rest of the country, which is great. But there is obviously a lot of work to do, including some difficult sectors to tackle, and I guess the details of what the region is going to kind of be able to do in the next phase are part of the discussions we'll be having with government around the single settlement and the spending review.
Any questions?
Do we know why our battery electric vehicles, a percentage of all, is so much lower in Yorkshire than elsewhere? It's really low in West Yorkshire, and we're better than they are, but still a lot worse than everywhere else. Is there a particular reason for that, do we know?
Yes, so the good news about that is the chart that I've got here. Since I produced this paper, I've looked at the data again, and what I realised was this chart is based on all vehicles, but it's based on where they're registered. Looking at it again, I realised that quite a lot of the electric, so something like 60% of electric vehicles are company cars, and they're often registered to a company office rather than the particular place. So if you look at Greater Manchester, for example, which is one of the places that performs better, that Stockport has 20% of all of the vehicles registered in Stockport are electric vehicles, but it's not in fact because everyone in Stockport is incredibly eco. It's just there must be a big company there. So I can circulate it because you won't be able to all see it, but I have got the data for if you just look at privately registered cars, which gives you more of a reflection of progress towards, obviously most cars are company cars, and that gives you more of a realistic sense of what's happening in particular places. And actually, when you look at it that way round, roughly 1% of vehicles are electric in pretty much all of the cities that are mentioned here. London is an exception; that's about double that, 2.5%. And I think realistically, at the moment, the places with the highest levels of electric vehicle uptake are generally better off places. So outside London, it's lots of kind of places like Cambridgeshire and South Gloucestershire, quite comfortable counties. So there's clearly something to look at here is how do we for the future make this an accessible option for everyone.
Thank you. The graph next to that one, I don't understand at all, because the blue bars are all charge points per 100,000, and then the orange bars are rapid charge points per 10,000, which seems to imply there's an awful lot more rapid charge points than there are total charge points, which doesn't feel right. I wondered if the orange one should have been per million rather than per 10,000, or am I just completely misunderstanding your graph?
No, that is very astute. That's correct. There's a typo. It should be I've divided by 10 where I should have been multiplying by 10. So it's roughly a quarter of the charge points in South Yorkshire, for instance, are rapid ones. But yeah, I'd sort of tried to massage the numbers so you could get both things in one chart, because they are, they're kind of, obviously both affecting different things. Anyway, but yes, that's correct, per million.
I'm just showing the report was so interesting, I read it in great depth.
It's good to know when I was, sat away late at night typing that it's not going out into the void. Good to know it's getting careful scrutiny.
Where are most of those rapid charge points? Are they car parks and things like that? No.
I think there's a bit of a mix. Yeah, car parks, public sort of buildings, and on street as well. You have the sort of the lamppost type ones that might be on just a street with residential parking or something like that. So yeah, bit of a spread.
And a question I almost asked the mayor, sort of asked. It seems a lot of our pollution comes from motorways and diesel rail. They're the heavier vehicles. Are we looking towards a solution for that?
I mean, in the long run, the solution is electrification. I mean, it's absolutely right that motorways are kind of, disproportionately strong for emissions. So, I mean, vehicles travelling at motorway speeds emit roughly 50% more per mile than vehicles travelling at slower speeds. So it's definitely, you're absolutely right, it's a big source of emissions. And I mean, I think motorway journeys, it's obviously some people will be able to switch in the long run from driving, from A to B via a motorway by taking public transport. But, things like obviously active travel and cycling is not an option, and probably local bus is probably not a great option for most people making motorway trips. And then rail as well, unless you're travelling from one city centre to another, which a lot of people are. But, that if you're travelling from, a town to another town and it's not on a direct rail, it's quite hard. So I think the bottom line is the faster we can get people who are going to drive into the future to make the switch over to electric, the quicker we'll be able to get that down.
So it's largely out with our control, isn't it?
Well, so the strongest policy levers undoubtedly sit with central government. They've got the zero emission vehicles mandate, which will push suppliers to start selling more electric vehicles, which will over time mean that essentially when everyone replaces their car, they'll have to get an electric. The potentially are things that can be done at the local level. I mean, the charge points definitely make a difference. People do say, would worry about where can I recharge, and so that makes a difference. And there might, I think there is one of the things we're sort of I'm interested in for our spending review bid is we're doing some really great community engagement demonstrators on domestic heat to kind of make it easy for people to understand what their options are and make it easy, particularly for private sector landlords, to know where to go and what to do to make that transition and what the sort of costs and benefits are. I'd be interested in whether we might be able to do something like that in the space of electric vehicles, because they are increasingly, they're not more expensive over their whole life than a petrol and diesel car. And so for lots of people who maybe had thought, if they're not kind of immersed in it, thought that it's not an option for them, actually maybe the time is coming when more people would be ready to switch if they knew a bit more about it. So I think there are things that you could do at a local level that might help sort of kind of overcome some of those social barriers. But having said all that, I think your introduction was correct that the main levers do sit with central government for that. That's definitely right.
Yeah, especially when we get into HGVs and heavy goods trains and things.
Yeah, that's right. And HGVs are a disproportionate source of emissions, particularly on those longer distance routes. And yeah, for sure, we're talking there about national operators mostly who will be replacing a fleet, and the technology has been slower to roll out. I mean, I think it is getting there. I think you can now buy battery electric HGVs that have the sort of range that that companies doing haulage would expect to be able to do for at least some of their kind of shorter routes. So it's coming, but for sure that will take longer than transitional cars.
And have we therefore considered, sorry to flog this to death, but they go past my house about every 5 minutes, just to declare an interest. Have we considered emissions controls on other than city centres?
So I think the levers for that mostly sit with local councils rather than MCAs. I mean, it's not something that I'm aware of being developed, but I mean, certainly I can, next time I'm kind of speaking to my counterparts at member authorities, say, you know, yeah, is this something that would be interested in expanding? Obviously, I mean, the clean air zone for Sheffield has been, well, I haven't necessarily seen a kind of, you know, an academic level cause and effect study, but over the time it's been in operation, the emissions have come down quite a lot. So, you know, it's clearly part of a mix of things which is helping. So potentially could be an effective tool if there was appetite to do that sort of thing, potentially.
Perhaps that's something that we could suggest to a previous report. Yes, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Greg, good and very interesting report, thank you. On 2.2, the right-hand graph about percentage of properties at EPC rating C or above, it says it's based on certificates issued in the last 10 years. You need an EPC certificate when you sell a house, so that will presumably go into the numbers, and presumably when new builds are constructed they get an EPC. But if you've got a house that's not been sold, that won't be anywhere in the figures. So there needs to be perhaps a bit of caution in terms of the way we interpret that, because my first thought was, oh, 40% of houses are already at C, and you've made in the comment in your report that we need to get all houses to C to hit the carbon targets. But probably that graph gives a better position than we're really in, does it? Because it's got many new build properties in there, which will be inflating the proportion.
Yes, potentially. So there's it isn't the best metric of all of the metrics that I've looked at in this space. That's why there's the footnote on that chart saying 69% of properties have an EPC, for exactly that reason, that if you don't do anything to your property, you don't need to get one. And it's also worth saying that the reason why it's over the last 10 years is once you've got one, even if you're going to sell it again, you don't need to get another one for 10 years. So some of the EPCs that are in this statistic will be 10 years old, and so I think, as you say, that yes, that potentially does mean there's a bias towards older properties and properties that have not had anything done to them for a long time. So the ones that aren't covered might be skewed towards lower. On the other hand, if there are properties that have had upgrades, those upgrades aren't necessarily reflected here either, unless the property has been sold. So there's a bit of error in both directions. I don't know why there isn't better data on that, but what I can say is that the MCA has commissioned and is in the middle of undertaking a housing stock survey. So once that's complete, we should have better data specifically for the sort of current picture in South Yorkshire, which is obviously key for us in terms of working out what scale of the challenge here is and where and how to prioritise.
That's interesting, actually, because I think gathering data on this must be extremely difficult to be able to measure, for example, CO2 emissions. And if you're trying to hit a target, having good quality data is absolutely key to that, because it's almost like trying to use a map without knowing where you are on the map. You've got to believe in the data that you've got. And looking at the graph that you've got on the right hand side in 2.1, that shows, I think, that we've pretty much made a 50% reduction in carbon emissions. Is that right? Over the last 17 years or so?
Yeah, it's, I think the number is in the. Hang on. I think it's more
So,
like 40%.
so we're in the right direction of travel.
Yes.
If you were to extend that graph another 17 years, do we hit our target of net zero, I guess is my question.
Great. So I'll take firstly the point about data and EPC certificates. I mean, you're right, and that's why we're doing the stock survey. Although the other thing I would say is, even if we allow for the fact that the data might be not quite right, we know that more than half, almost certainly, of properties are not meeting the standard that we need them to. So I think for the time being, the priority is just to fix as many of the properties as we can and move it in the right direction. Yeah. We then get better data so that when we get towards the business end of finishing the job, we know where to look. But for now, the data is clear enough that we just need to get on with it and do as much as we can. In terms of extrapolating from that chart into the future, I can't find, I did have it previously on, or maybe it's in a different paper, the percentage change over it's sort of I mean, the biggest driver of emissions reduction over that time is decarbonisation of the electricity grid, and once that's happened, we've done it and we can't do it again, so we have to move on to the harder bits, which is transport, heating, industry. There's absolutely nothing automatic about that trend continuing, but on the other hand, we've got lots of activity. The government, and I think particularly since the election, lots of new initiatives to kind of be doing more and for an increased role for local authorities and potentially funding streams becoming available to do more. So lots of good signs. Can I say, are we definitely going to hit the target? I mean, it's a lot is going to depend, I think, on what central government does, what funding we might get through the spending review, and also things that happen in markets that are, for instance, how willing are people to because people are going to have to put a bit of their own money into getting an electric car or getting a heat pump. At least people who can afford to pay are going to have to do that, and how quickly people get on board with doing that, and how quickly markets can supply the stuff we need. It doesn't all sit in the mayor's hands, so I can't say yes or no, but I think the work that we're doing now to kind of refresh a strategy, put proposals forward to the spending review for top priority actions, I think we'll be able to get a better, certainly we're going in the right direction, we'll get a better sense of it, and I think in due course we probably do need to do a stock take of okay, this is how far we've got, this is how far we've still got to go. I mean, I think that probably is an exercise that would need to be done at some point.
Thank you.
At what stage in the planning and building of properties does the requirement for EPCC kick in? Is it at the point of building or the point of planning?
That's a good question. My understanding is at the moment the most advanced and stretching bit of the regulatory framework is building standards. So it's the point of building. But equally, you wouldn't. Not an expert in the planning system. I imagine you wouldn't get planning permission for a building that was not going to meet building standards. So I anticipate that it's kind of both. I think the other thing in this space as well is that the government is, I think, expecting to put a requirement on new properties to have either a heat pump or some other low carbon heating from 2027, and again that's part of the building requirement, so you can't declare the house complete and sell it until it has that. So I think there's central government regulation on what you can build, which will apply whether or not it's required in planning permission, is my understanding. I could be wrong about that.
Well, I'm not sure either, but when I ask this question in another forum, I'm often told, but we got planning permission 3 years ago. However,
if I was a builder, I would be double checking the regulations to see if that's definitely the case, because they might find it's not.
And the other thing is that getting a heat pump a lot of the energy is wasted if you don't have a suitable EPC grade. So if people get heat pumps, they're just throwing heat out the window, literally.
Yeah.
Are we going to be able to finance that that extra protection for all properties? I realise a lot of social housing will get it, but will private housing get it? Private residents.
So yeah, I mean that's exactly why there's so much government and local and actually private funding going into insulation and energy efficiency improvements, because exactly that reason. You might be able to make the building 10 or 20% more efficient by insulating it, but you don't get to zero carbon until you put the heat pump in. But exactly as you say, the heat pump won't really work, or I think you can make it work. It would, as I understand it, it's lower carbon to heat a leaky house with a heat pump, or certainly will be once the electricity grid is decarbonised, which the government is saying it will do by 2030. So from a decarbonisation perspective, you can have that, but it's more expensive because you'd be, as you say, throwing electricity into it. So that that's exactly why we do want to fund insulation. I mean, I think it's probably worth saying that at this point, the bit which has gone fastest is insulation. So which is why we're saying, well, we've the schemes that have been running in the last decade have insulated 12% or so of homes, and the EPC ratings show that the starting point was that around 40% did meet the standard, so C is about what you need for a heat pump. Whereas we've only got a tiny proportion, I think it's significantly less than 1% having a heat pump at the moment. So if you like, at the moment there are plenty of houses that are adequately insulated that you could add a heat pump to, but there aren't, as we stand, a whole load of houses where people are trying to put a heat pump in that don't have insulation, because you wouldn't probably want to put a heat pump in until you had got the insulation. Does that make sense?
It does, except that by 2027 we can't have gas boilers, can we?
And for new homes only, that is not. So if you've got an existing old property and it has a gas boiler, you can replace that gas boiler. It's only if you build a new house. So the new house will have to be EPC. I think it might even be B as the standard for new housing. Certainly it's above C. So yes, you have to build the house so it's not leaky, and from 2027 put a heat pump in.
Okay. Yeah, there's a term I like, coined by the Swedes, I think, called lighting a fire for the crows.
Sorry, say that again?
Called lighting a fire for the crows. If you have a heat pump on a leaky house, it just goes straight out.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I have seen some analysis which suggests that for some properties it might be cheaper to get. So there are now high power heat pumps which work more efficiently at higher heat. So it might be that for some homes you can have an EPC rating D, and if you buy, so it's more expensive and it costs more to run, but that might be still cheaper, because obviously the insulation is often quite expensive as well and disruptive. So for some homes there might be a bit of an option about whether you prefer to go more on the insulation or more on the electrification. But and I think it is worth saying that there is urgent decarbonisation priorities, things that we expect the trajectory to be heading briskly downwards. Over the last decade, that was electricity generation. I think right now that is cars, where the uptake of electric cars needs to be shooting right upwards. Heat pumps is the one behind that. So we're not expecting that everyone starts getting a heat pump in their house over the next 5 years, because we know we're not ready on and this isn't just South Yorkshire, this is the country. We know we're not ready on insulation yet to make that change. It's in terms of peak heat pump installation, we're probably a decade away from it, but the emphasis on insulation is, I guess, to prepare us for when we are at that point.
I just finished on this point. I just wonder how long it's going to take us, South Yorkshire or anywhere else, to get to a desirable point without pouring a whole lot of money into it, more than we are now.
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's that will be part of our pitch to the government at the spending reviews. We're ambitious, we want to do what we can, but exactly as you say, it costs money, and what we don't want to do is reach a situation where people are being told, particularly people on lower incomes, they've got to switch over and there's no support. So that's exactly what we're trying to avoid.
Certainly if we look at the number of terrace houses in South Yorkshire, for instance. Thank you very much. Engaging report. Thank you. And item 21 is risk monitoring report. Claire. Thank you very much.
Chair. Thank you. So things are in a fairly steady state at the moment on the risk register. There's not an awful lot of change since last time. Just a few bits to know. Obviously, we've got the addition of the new corporate risk around the police budget issue, which was discussed in the private item earlier this morning. That's referenced in section 3.1 in the cover report. And then at corporate risk level, the corporate performance management has reduced in residual score from medium high to medium, and I think that reflects a lot of the work that Kate's been doing on performance management and the regular rhythm that we've got into with corporate performance reporting now to ELB, to the executive board. And then at directorate level, the balanced anchor weights, and my laptop has just died, so I'm just going to revert to the notes on my phone. Yeah, the balanced anchor weights risk, which Paul mentioned earlier, which we had a discussion of at Transport Risk Working Group around. We're continuing to work with policing and reform colleagues to integrate their risk profile into SIMCAs, and I met with the new interim director of policing and reform and head of governance yesterday to discuss that. So in the next dashboard report, you'll start to see them represented as another directorate within the organisation, as the other ones are. And then at section 3.5 in the cover report, we're just proposing that we don't bring a dashboard report to the next meeting. In the committee work plan, we commit to bringing a quarterly report, and we've actually got 5 meetings in this year. And due to the timing of the meetings, we'd be shutting the system down, doing the reporting, opening the system, shutting the system down. So what we're proposing is that we bring a bit more of a narrative report on some of the corporate risks that are affected by the government spending review, because we'll start to know more about how that's playing out and the implications of that over the next few weeks, I guess. So we're proposing that we bring that to the February meeting, and then we'll bring a dashboard report to the March meeting, if committees
I think it's always useful
that.
to have a sort of commentary on things anyway.
Yeah, yeah. So that's it from me on the risk management report.
Just one thing I'd like to praise Claire and her team for is we at Transport Risk Working Group, we got the SIFTL report, risk dashboard, which is in exactly the same format now as this, and it made it so much easier to be able to move from one to another and see the same format and layout. And if that's what we're trying to do for the Police and Crime Commissioner, then all the better, really, that we'll have a common format of managing risk. So well done, I think.
Thank you. No, it's a team effort. We are working with SIFTL as well to get their risk into our 4-risk system, which will make the analysis and the real-time kind of tracking better for us and for them, to really develop that management tool for them, so that and we can configure it how they need to be configured. So we attended their leadership group last week to talk that through with them. So that's a constant piece of work that we're on with at the minute.
Thanks, Claire. Just one question from me. On the corporate risk heat map, you're showing, I think, 16 out of the 21 risks, residual risks, as above target. But there's only 5, 6, 7 of them above the appetite. So we're saying our appetite's higher than our target, are we? Why, if they're above target, why aren't they above our appetite as well? Or are we saying the appetite's a bit higher than the target, so we can miss our target but still be prepared to eat them, as it were?
Because I've not got it in front of me now because my laptop's died. So appetite's showing as higher than the target.
Yeah, you've got little triangles showing the ones that are above appetite, but a lot more of those are actually above target. I wonder why they.
Target is medium.
If you take the second risk, its target is medium.
Yeah.
Its residual is medium high, so it's above target, but it's not showing us a little triangle on show above appetite.
It relates back to the appetite levels that we've set in the risk management framework. So it may be that we've coded that with the analysis code of, so for example, policy. So the appetite then is higher. So it may be that in this next review, annual review of the risk management framework, we retest some of those appetite levels, I think, and look at the categories that we've got. If it's not playing out quite right,
so I think it's, as I said, the appetite's above the target. In effect, we've got a risk. We can accept this level of risk, but for a target, we'd like it to be lower than that level. Which I kind of understand. I just wanted to clarify.
I think that's right. Yeah, but we can just retest what we've put in the risk management framework to make sure it's giving us the right information. If you know what I mean. Yeah. Thank you. 5 minutes. So this is just the regular update to the committee. We've used some different colours this time, Dave, as requested. Just to note that we've marked 2 actions as complete now, and we've rescheduled the target date for the consultation engagement framework document, and that's due to the need to get the sequencing right. So the work that they're doing on the corporate plan that Kate mentioned this morning, and it needs to kind of sequence in with that, so I understand. So the original target date we set for the output of that action has in effect slipped, but it's just to get that sequencing right.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Claire. What have I missed? Breach controls.
Thank you. We've no formal breaches of control to report at this session. Just to follow up on the last session where I reported a near miss, the monitoring officer and myself have taken a presentation to our exec leadership board about procurement practices and about culture and behaviour and the way officers are approaching procurement. So we'll probably make a few changes to contract procedure rules this cycle ahead of the new financial year. So maybe that we'll come and talk to you about that as well. I think I mentioned at the last session that whilst we didn't have many breaches, actually we were pushing the limits of the system at times. So we're looking at what we can do about that. But some of this is pure behaviours that we're trying to address.
Okay. So on to the work plan now. Claire, it's you again.
Thank you. Just a couple of points to note on this. The SIFTL governance internal audit was originally scheduled for February, but we've brought that in before, and obviously it was on the agenda this morning, so we've taken that off. And then in anticipation of committee agreeing that we don't bring a dashboard report, we've taken that off as well. Just to note that the March meeting date is listed as the 18th. It's now the 11th, so since we've kind of finalised that, we've just that meeting has moved and swapped with the MCA meeting. Gareth asked me to perhaps note that would it be useful to bring back a report on the antisocial behaviour at Rotherham to a future meeting and add that onto the work plan potentially.
Yeah,
and the health and safety
without singling out one venue. Perhaps you could give us an overall.
Overall, yeah, that's fine. But we'll note something down to bring something back on that. And then finally, being asked to ask if we should consider adding a single item agenda for the endorsement of the accounts, and it's due to the timing of the sign off. I perhaps let Gareth explain or Mike explain the sequencing of that, but we may need to schedule a one-off meeting in January just to deal with that.
Yeah, this just relates to the conclusion of the 23-24 accounts, which are the first set of accounts that will have been audited by KPMG. I think they're substantially complete. There's no sort of like issues so far of note that are coming out, but we will need to get this over the line by the 28th of February. If we don't get it over the line by the 20th of Feb, we'll end up with another disclaimed opinion. So we're really keen to get this through. The time in between MCA board meetings and the audit committees that we've got don't work nicely on this. So if possible, we were looking to arrange just a single item, maybe just an hour, where we could just bring the final accounts to you for endorsement onto the MCA for full approval.
Yep, it's all right for me.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, we're going to add tram asset renewal to those. Does the 4th of February, does that work for the IDPC workings? I don't want to drag officers away from submitting.
Sorry, Paul. The IPDC meeting, I think, is right at the back end of January.
Right.
So it is technically feasible that we could give a verbal update immediately after that at the 4th of February ASRC, yes.
Thank you.
The 29th of January, I think, not 29th of February. The Treasury Management.
Treasury management.
Yeah, it's January.
January.
Yeah.
Okay. Item 25. Issues for escalation.
Sorry, Chair, just before we move off the work plan, and it depends on other members' views, but I wondered if it might be helpful for the committee to understand how the police funding works. You mentioned this morning, Gareth, about the police, the Home Office grant, because I'd appreciate just almost like a one-page summary, if that's the way to do it, or we can do it in committee, is how does it work between the force itself? I mean, do they hold cash balances themselves, or is it all controlled by the PCC, and they give the money as required? It's just understanding the relationship between the forces finance team, because they've got their own finance team, the PCC. I think I understand the relationship with the MCA, but just a little bit of background on that, given the points we've been discussing earlier today.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We'll bring something for the next committee, or when's the one after January? Okay, yeah. So 11th of March. The budget will be set by then, so it might be an opportunity just to flow it on the back of that. Yeah.
Right. Is that it? Did we cover that? Sorry, I'm still on my other agenda. Yeah, okay. Issues for escalation, 26. 25, sorry. Escalate some issues. Who's going to escalate them?
I'll escalate one. Just on behalf of the MCA, just say thank you for all the work of the committee over the calendar year 2024. I appreciate there's been an awful lot over that time, and I know from the mayor through to Martin and myself, we really welcome the challenge, but also the support that you've given us over the last calendar year. It's been quite a difficult year for officers, so it's always been helpful to bring issues to you and seek your guidance. So thank you very much, and have a great Christmas.
I was going to say, it's a Section 73. Merry Christmas.
it never fails to amaze me how much knowledge and detail the officers in this forum are able to hold in their heads, and the depth of the reports that you give. I think we've got to thank you for that. That's really good work. Congratulations on that. And Merry Christmas. There you go. And if sometimes I do get confused, it's because I've got 3 or 4 agendas here.